Everyone, good afternoon, good morning in Latin America, good afternoon here in Europe, good evening in Asia, good afternoon in Africa as well. We're starting the session Strong Cities 2030, the role of cities in sustainable reactivation post-COVID. Today, we have four invitees. We have Dr. Kin Wan Poon, who is the director of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities in the city of Singapore. We have Mrs. Ruth Waruguru, who is the director of urban planning at the city of Nairobi in Kenya. We also have Tomás González, who is the executive director of Fundación Tribu in Chile. And we also have Professor Claudia Garcia, who is an urbanist and architect from Brazil, who's also based right now in the city of Concepción in Chile. So welcome. I would like to welcome you all and thank you very much for taking part of this session. The session is going to last for about an hour and 15 minutes. And we've structured this session, first of all, with a presentation by Professor Kin Wan Poon, and then another presentation by Ms. Waruguru. We're also going to have space for Q&A at the end of this session. So if participants want to express any question, please just write it down on the chat box, and then we're going to select the questions. And we're going to try to squeeze in as many questions as possible in the time allocated we have for this session. I would also like to ask all participants to mute the microphone so that we don't have any interference while running the presentations. And yes, I would like to first of all invite Mr. Kin Wan Poon, Director for Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities in Singapore. The floor is yours.
Very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world, and especially in Chile and Santiago. If I could just get the slides to be shown. Okay, I hope everyone can see the slides. Yes, okay. So the title of my presentation today is Strong Cities 2030, Role of Cities for Sustainable Reactivation. I will share with you a few ideas that I have about how we can design for this sustainable reactivation by designing for the global, for the social, the economic, the infrastructure, and for the people. And the reason we want to do that is made clear by the picture I have on the right-hand side or left-hand side, depending on how you're looking at my slides, where it's actually a sculpture by a Hong Kong artist who did this in 2017. And the words there in Cantonese actually means that they want to look up every day. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to hope for better tomorrow and to have something to look forward to every day. Before I do, I just want to say that I'm glad to be presenting to a Santiago conference. I wish I could be there because the last time I was there was about 10 years ago when I was on a government trip regarding free trade and negotiations. I was warmly welcomed by the Chilean authorities, by the Chilean people. It's a beautiful city, very warm, very colorful culture, and of course, who can forget the food? But today, Santiago and Singapore are bound by the fact that we are facing the same crisis. In Singapore, these are the numbers for our tourist arrivals. In June 2019, this is last year, we had about 1.5 million tourist arrivals in Singapore in the month of June. This year, the number of tourist arrivals has dropped to about 2,000. If that is not a 99% or even 100% drop, I don't know what is. And I've met many, many professionals and workers in the sector, and it's really, really tough for them. And this is tough not just for people who are affected directly by the crisis now. For many of the young people who are studying and not in the workforce yet, it's hard for them too. In Asia, you find that it's affecting them about their confidence, about their employment, about the sense of anxiety about the future. So it's a crisis that needs to be tackled, and I'm pleased to be here to share with you some of my ideas. My ideas come from two sources. One source is I am on the Strong Cities 2030 network of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And as part of that network, just last week, we had a week-long conference to discuss what are some of the principles as well as initiatives that cities could do to remain strong and to recover from the crisis. At the same time, I do my own research in the Lee Kuan Yew Center, and we do quite a bit of work in thinking about technology disruption, about helping workers who are struggling. And of course, our work has been recognized around the world, translated to Korean, invited to share in China. And I hope that I have something that will be interesting for you from my research as well as my work in the Strong Cities Network. I have 5 ideas to share with you today. They have to do with the relationships that we have with each other and with the institutions of our cities and our country. They are first about the relationship between people and leaders, then the relationship between people and the economy, then the possibilities in the global economy despite the crisis, then what we need to do with society and the relationship of people with them, and of course our relationship with infrastructure. Let me first touch on the relationship between people and leaders. And I think the key principle to take away here, the key idea to take away here is to think about designing for difficulties. This has been a guiding philosophy of the research that we do in the center. It's been a guiding philosophy for me that whether it's technology, whether it's economy, whether it's society, if we can use and think about design as a way to make people's lives better, help them overcome their everyday challenges, then that's something worthwhile doing, and that's something that will benefit many people at the same time. An example is something that my colleague is doing in China. He's put together a data sharing platform for taxi drivers and city leaders. And the idea was very simple. The data from the taxi drivers already existed in a government system and in the GPS systems that was found in every cab, in every taxi. All they had to do was to make the data available to everybody, to taxi drivers as well as potential passengers, and they could better match supply and demand between taxi drivers and potential passengers. As a result of solving that difficulty of finding customers and passengers, they were able to boost income by 8% for the taxi drivers. And one of the cities that implemented this solution actually won an innovation award from the municipal government for bringing about better benefits to everybody. And the interesting conversation that he had with some of the taxi drivers, they said it was the first time the government had done anything good for them. And this might be something to think about with regards to making life a little bit better for everyone by using data and technology and boosting income. But of course, in this crisis, other than boosting income, there are a lot of people who are affected in the workforce, a lot of workers who are struggling, having some difficulty. And this is the nature of the work that we've been doing for the last few months after the pandemic hit everybody. We have taken our work thinking about how to help people who are affected by technology disruption, and we are using our same principles to think about how to help people being affected by the crisis. And I'll share with some of those ideas in my subsequent points. For example, in my next point, I'll talk a little bit about how we want to rebuild work. A lot of people are out of work. A lot of work has been disrupted by the pandemic. We can't go to work because of safe distancing, because of the fears of being an infection. So my suggestion is we need to rebuild the work back task by task. And the reason is quite simple. I was having a conversation 2 weeks ago with somebody who's been badly affected. And I was told that he's been talking to his counterparts in the industry. And they say that, work is slowly getting better, but it's getting better one laptop at a time. Things are slow, but as long as we're making progress, then that's important and that's useful. And I would like to suggest to you that one way to think about this is to take everybody's jobs, look at the tasks that they have to do, look at what has been affected, and gradually look at what can be restored and reinstated so that we progressively open up slowly. And as the old phrase goes, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. As long as you're making progress, then we're going to do a little bit better every day. And at some point, it's going to just get better. Beyond the work, we also think a little bit about other opportunities that we could create as a result of the pandemic. And this is where I suggest that if you think of it at the global level, we can create what I call a new remote. A lot of people talk about a new normal. Let me suggest that something called the new remote. So for example, in the research that I do, we've been able to use our research to calculate what percentage of each occupation has been disrupted and what can be done remotely. And if we think about this as we reinstall and reinstate each of these jobs task by task, bit by bit, what we could do is we could be thinking also about whether some of these tasks can potentially be plugged into the global market, potentially could ride the opportunities in the global market. And this is important because in the research that we have done, building on the research that people around the world have done, The reality is most cities are plugged into a global network of economy, trade, as well as connectivity. These are all opportunities in these global networks. If we can plug ourselves in and learn to manage a global opportunity, we develop new skills for the workforce, new skills for the cities, and in doing so, raise the quality of working for everybody and raise the level of opportunities for our workforce all around the world. And it's possible because I think Chile has a highly educated workforce, it's got a dynamic population, and there are probably a lot of opportunities waiting for the population in Chile and waiting all around the world that could be done. The fourth point I have is beyond the economy, we need to think about society. And I like to suggest that in terms of society and the relationship people have with everybody, that we think a little bit about what I call designing for kindness. It seems rather unusual as a phrase, but maybe it's not so unusual. This is a snapshot of a Google search I did somewhere in June and July. If you just search the word kindness and COVID-19, you find that there are many examples of people being kind to each other during the lockdowns. And as each of us were having difficulty, either at work or with our health or with a lot of other things that we struggle with that we used to take for granted. And people reached out, helped each other, and make the difference in small and big ways for everyone in society. It'll be a pity that as we recover, that we forget that we were kind to each other. And perhaps one of the things that we can think about is that we can start thinking about all the things that we could do to design for kindness. On the left-hand side, you see this picture where I typed in design for and see what Google will suggest. You'll find that we know how to design for a lot of things. Safety, manufacturing, for price, for user experience, and for maintainability. But we don't really talk about designing for kindness. And maybe that's something that we need to do as we recover from the pandemic and the crisis. And if all of us think that's a little bit idealistic, well, there's also research that shows that if you're kind often enough to people around you, you're actually a little bit happier every day. So if you can be good to other people and good to yourself, why not? And maybe that's how we should think about the society that we want to have post-pandemic. My last idea that I want to share with you today has got to do with the infrastructure. And this really came out from the conversations that I had last week in the Strong Cities Network. It was about 30 to 40 people collaborating online, thinking through what cities needed to recover and to remain strong. And one of the interesting ideas that came up was that in the infrastructure that we'll have to rebuild, or the infrastructure that we may build as a result, or even there are opportunities to redesign the infrastructure because of safe distancing and new public health measures, we could also be thinking about how we can design the infrastructure for interactions, because that's going to be so important for us to get to know each other again after we've had a lockdown. A good examples are parks. I'm sure when we could, many of us went to parks. It was the case in Singapore too, that when we needed a break, we needed to relax, or we needed to just be less stressed up about the lockdown, we all went to the parks, and that's where people got to know each other and felt that life was a little bit better. So why not, as you think through all the things that are happening in the city, in the infrastructure that we either need to rebuild, change, or build from scratch, that we start thinking about designing them for social interactions and to improve the social capital and the trust that we have with each other. Let me conclude. I gave 5 ideas about what we could do. Between the relationship between people and leaders is to build trust by designing for difficulties, to tackle difficulties, help people overcome challenges every day. In economy and people, we're really talking about rebuilding work task by task, slowly but surely, and slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And in the potential for new economic opportunities, we could be thinking about global networks of commerce and trade, as well as connectivity, and to build opportunities for the workforce and to raise the skills in the workforce so that we're ready for the economy that comes and to build a stronger economy. In the relationship between people and society, we're talking about thinking about how we can build initiatives, build policies to design for kindness. And of course, in infrastructure, we should think a little bit about designing them for interactions as we rebuild and as we build anew from scratch the infrastructure that we need in the city of our future. Lastly, I want to say that some of these ideas are actually found in this Strong Cities 2030 declaration from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. The team in Berlin and around the world are hard at work putting together this common vision that we put as a public document at the end of November. So if you want to see a little bit more, get a little bit more ideas, feel free to ask your Konrad Adenauer Foundation colleagues for access to this document. With that, I end my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions during this conference, but also be happy to take any questions you might have over email, and my email is put at the bottom of this slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Keen Won, for that very inspiring presentation. You raised many issues which seem to be excluded currently from the agendas when we talk about COVID in cities, that we tend to talk about the economy, technology, and infrastructure, but you bring in aspects of people's anxiety about the future, designing for kindness, and certainly how to reconstruct interactions in the public space when people, as you mentioned, need to get to know each other again in the public space. Those are certainly issues that are a part of the broader paradigm of sustainability, and certainly challenging right now for situations around the world. In this context, I would like to invite Tomás González, who is the executive director of Fundación Tribu. Tomás is based in Santiago de Chile, and I would like to invite Tomás to reflect upon Keen Won's presentation, particularly from the perspective that right now Chile is going through a very interesting and fast changing process where democracy is being discussed from many angles, and this in the context of a pandemic presents certainly many of the challenges that have been raised by Keen Won Poon. How do you see, Tomás, the experience of Singapore in the context of Chile, where we need to work on the construction of trust, rethink democracy, public space in a context of turbulent change? I would like to invite you to reflect upon these perspectives. Tomás, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi there. It's an honor to be invited to this event and to comment on the great presentation of Keen Won Poon. And it is also a challenging topic, no? Because we need to start by acknowledging that we don't have a certain answer. But I do think that the topic is highly relevant. Cities have been at the forefront of the response to the COVID crisis here in Chile and everywhere in the world. And I'm sure that cities will be at the forefront of the recovery. So we need to be paying attention to this. I would like to start by commenting on the point that Mr. Poon did about designing for kindness. I think that I agree with the fact that that's an unusual idea, but I think that it is very important. And in the times we are living, I think we need to put that idea on the table more frequently. So I think that that's an idea we should really take into consideration here in Chile and the rest of Latin America and everywhere in the world, because for sure different aspects of COVID crisis have generated anxieties and other emotional troubles. So now more than ever, we need to do our best to be kind, because I mean, if we live in cities because we are capable of living together, and in order to live together, we need to develop our kindness. So thank you for sharing that idea. Then I see in the presentation of Mr. Poon a clear, very clear ideas and examples on how, as technology has changed, the way we live together has also changed. And we have these changes in technology, changes in culture, but institutions don't seem to change in an equal pace. So I think we need to pay attention to that, to public institutions, and in particular to the decision-making processes. In this new scenario that we are entering because of COVID and because of all the technological changes, we have a lot of decisions to make. No? And I think that looking to the future, to this recovery, to this new beginning, we also need to think about how we are going to make those decisions. And on that regard, I would like to complement what Mr. Poon has presented by bringing the concept of open government. Open government is something that we at the Tribu Foundation have been working here in Chile with the support of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, with different municipalities, Peñalolén, Renca, Calle Larga, San Pedro de la Paz. And what we've seen there is a set of very high standards on civic participation, transparency, and accountability. And I think that those standards and of opening municipalities and other local institutions for participatory planning and participatory decision making is key in this new context in which we are, because we are in a new scenario. We need to deliberate a lot of things. We need to make new decisions. And also, connected with the first point that was presented by Mr. Poon, when he was saying people for leaders, no, and designing for challenges in order to gain trust. I think that transparency and accountability are also key elements for generating trust nowadays. And because of these new technologies, we also have people, citizens, we have higher expectations on our involvement in public decision making, and I think is an element of the discussion that should also need to be present, how we design for democracy, for a smart democracy, a legitimate democracy, in order to build the best possible future. So that would be some general comments. I don't know if you have any specific question, or maybe we can dive into other ideas during the final Q&A.
That's great, Thomas. Thank you so much for your comments. Very timely, I would say, talking about open government, aspects of transparency, accountability, key aspects within the governance, urban governance paradigm, and certainly the issue of building trust and positioning the role of technology on that construction is certainly key. And I would actually like to challenge all the presenters today to think about whether or not the current management of technology you consider is ripe or mature enough for people to actually make the most of that facility in order to boost transparency, accountability, and trust. In other words, are we citizens ready to make the most of the available technological means in order to boost governance at the urban level? I would like to pose that question, just to leave it there for maybe comments afterwards. And I would like now to invite Ms. Ruth Waruguru, who's the Director of Urban Planning at the city of Nairobi. Good afternoon, Ruth. It's a pleasure to have you here. And Ruth is going to make a presentation, which is going to be afterwards commented by Claudia Garcia. So, Ruth, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and Andreas. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this virtual conference discussing this very important issue on how to deal with the current crisis that we are facing as city managers, and going to focus on what we have done as a city to overcome some of the challenges, or how we are dealing with the challenges. And I'll zoom in a bit into the informal settlements, where the manifestation of this crisis has been felt the most in my city. I think I'm not able to see that one. I would have to open the one on my laptop. Yeah, so just to ground us a little bit on the context of my city. So the city is located in Kenya, in the East African coast, and it measures about 500,000 kilometers square with a population of 50 million. And therefore, the densities are quite high, depending on certain regions that are well endowed. And Nairobi happens to be the capital city and measures approximately 700 kilometer squares. And the population, as per the last census, stands at 4.3 million inhabitants. So I would like to start by posing what Ban Ki-moon stated slightly above 10 years ago, that the inability of contemporary planning, urban planning, is to address rapid growth of cities, expansion of the informal sector, and mitigating climate change. And these have been argued as the most pressing challenges of the 21st century. And I can't agree more with that. We are facing it in our cities, and we continue to experience this on a day-to-day basis. And every city tries using various models of dealing with this challenge with certain levels of success. So the urban pressures that we are actually facing are to do with the population, rapid population, especially in our developing cities. As per the 2018 United Nations projections, that in about 20 years from now, about 70% of the population will live in urban areas, and this then means high densities. So in the light of what we are facing right now, how is that going to pan out in the years to come? These are new challenges that are throwing us as urban managers out of our comfort zones with regard to thinking of strategies to deal with all the crises that come forth in our cities. And we know that historically overcrowding in cities has been linked to the spread of infectious diseases. So this brings to the fore the kind of models that we are using. Like for my city, we are currently encouraging high density compact development. And now we are caught up in that space where we have to think about high densities vis-a-vis a pandemic that really requires us to really observe certain parameters in terms of space requirements. And like I said before, cities have adopted various approaches to address their challenges. And most cities have adopted the master planning approaches, which are the traditional approaches. And these have been evolving over time. For my city, Nairobi, we formulated an integrated urban development master plan 2014 to 2030, and it comprises of concepts to deal with the issues that we face as a city, underlying the fact that we are aiming to achieve sustainable development. So we are looking at the economic part of it, we are looking at the social bit of it, the environmental bit of it, in order to improve the living conditions of our population. The main thrust of our strategy is to decentralize functions away from the central business district where everybody converges. And this is very key, especially now when we are faced with a pandemic that requires that we observe physical distance, we reorganize the spatial pattern of our living environment. Of course, we were aiming at having our city being globally attractive and of course, attaining economic, environmental, sustainability, having governance sustainability in terms of involving all the stakeholders, public, private sector, and also maintaining the socio-cultural bit of it. So now we are rethinking, is this the right model to use in light of this pandemic? Yet we have to think on our feet because the scene is unfolding, and as city managers, the answers are we are being looked upon as the ones having all the answers. So looking at how the city of Nairobi and cities around the world have evolved over time, it is from a small nucleus to mega cities. And this has happened to Nairobi, having the first plans way out there in 1898, and the most recent one being in 2014. And what we are saying is that this over the years has really meant a lot in terms of compounding the challenges of mobility because of the high densities, because of inadequate resources, issues of compromised living conditions in most of the informal settlements. And in light of what we are facing, this is a challenge that has really jolted us to action. And the city government has already moved to one of the informal settlements and started action immediately. I will share about it as I move along. And so we are looking at decentralizing business away from the commercial center, away from the center of the city, and advocating for mini cities out there, what we are calling sub-centers of high compact density. That's what I was saying earlier. Is this model going to be sustainable in the long run, given that we're in the midst of a crisis and we don't know in the future what else will come forth? So perhaps as city planners, we need to be rethinking about which models can stand the test of time, no matter what comes, whether it's something that is airborne, whether it's something that is environmental, whatever nature of crisis, how braced are we going to be in terms of dealing with all these? So looking at the interventions in the informal settlements, which are characterized by poor infrastructure and very high densities, and for Nairobi's case, they comprise about 50% of the city's population. I talked about a population of 4.3 million inhabitants, therefore about half of them living in informal settlements. So the immediate interventions that were done was to improve using a multi-agency approach, and this multi-agency approach included development partners and government, both at the national government level and the county government level, was to improve the infrastructure of the informal settlements and the provision of hand washing equipment, provision of soap, masks, food relief and cash relief every week. And this is because the nature of what you are facing has more to do with the hygiene, has more to do with ensuring that people do not overcrowd and all that. And at the government level, there was provision of 93 water boreholes across all the informal settlements to ensure that people did proper hand washing and observed hygiene, because that was taken as the most effective strategy towards combating the pandemic. Also, there was provision of 24 health facilities within a record time, which now operate on a 24 hours basis, as opposed to the outpatient health facilities where people could not access during the night. The other approach that the government used was to empower the youth who had been thrown out of jobs by coming up with a program which locally we call Kazi Mtaani, meaning neighborhood jobs, and the youth were involved in all the government projects to provide various levels of skills depending on their level of education. The other intervention now narrowing down to this settlement that I was talking about, it is called Mukuru settlement. With regard to urban development, there was rapid implementation of local physical development plan, which was still in a draft form. However, because of the urgency of the matter, the government went ahead to implement the drafts with regard to road development programs in terms of opening up the area. The stormwater drainage was in a poor state, and because issues of ensuring that we had proper sanitary conditions in those areas, so the road development project involved upgrading the roads from earth to bitumen standards, widening the internal accesses from some as small as 1 or 2 meters all the way to minimum of 9 meters. Of course, these involved a bit of displacements, but the community was well aware and well involved, and they were willing to do what it would take to deal with this issue of the pandemic. Also enhancing public travel within the settlement by improving the access to the commuter train station within the settlement. The other one was improved access, now specifically to that settlement, improved access to water. Previously, the residents there were buying water at very exorbitant prices, and therefore the government provided free water through drilling boreholes at strategic points within the settlement. The other aspect was about solid waste management, previously poorly handled, but now there is a very deliberate effort to deal with the wastes involving the community and also the government. The final one is on social amenities strengthening. So currently the government has embarked on construction of 13,000 social housing units within that settlement. This is upon realization that the housing conditions are currently very poor. The congestion at household level, leave alone at the settlement level, are very high. So by building these units, the government has embarked on a process of really ensuring that the environment will be conducive to any future eventualities. And out of all these, generally, what have we learned from the pandemic? We have learned that we need to rethink about the urban planning models that we are using, and development control is very key. We've had challenges of development enforcement and non-adherence to planning standards. And therefore, when we are caught up in the middle of this crisis, it calls to mind that we really need to enforce fully and adhere to the planning standards as per the building codes. The other thing that we have learned is about planning zooming a little bit more into health considerations when forecasting.
I think that we might have Ruth. Are you still there? No, I think that there must be maybe an internet a connectivity problem. We're gonna we're gonna be aware whenever you're back, so that we can. I understand that you were on the last slides, but it would be great that you could if you could present your final comments on that too. Let's bear that for a moment until Ruth is back. Maybe we can move on to introduce Claudia Garcia, who is an architect on urban development. She's Brazilian and she's based in Chile. And I would like to introduce maybe some of the key points raised by Ruth in her presentation. She talks about the challenges to urban planning, the traditional approaches, for instance, what they have tried to change in the master plan of Nairobi, where they try to move away from high density, compact development to a more decentralized service provided by the city in different places, so that people don't have to commit centrally to the city. Ruth mentions that the pandemic is actually placing new questions to the traditional paradigms of urban planning, because we have to rethink how the space requirements will be able to cope with decentralizing services in the city. So she poses the question whether or not this is the right model to answer to this pandemic. Are we in the current development of plans for sustainability in urban areas? Is this the right model to answer to the pandemic? She highlights some of the aspects that they've been working on in the city. So concentration of services and segregation of more than 2 million people in areas with very poor services and poor living conditions, and highlighting some of the aspects of interventions in terms of waste management, hygiene, and social housing and health. Those being the main aspects of the way they've been coping with the pandemic so far. I would like to invite Claudia to take these aspects into consideration, and I would like to also introduce a question by one of the participants who's asking, where she poses the question whether greening cities or improving services can also lead to low-income areas to be gentrified. Is this also going to be a problem that we're going to have to face in the context of rethinking cities in a post-pandemic stage? Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christopher and Ruth, for the presentation. It's very interesting, the presentation of Ruth, because the relevance about planning and the tradition of planning in the case of Nairobi. I think this is the principal challenge about our cities, because the effect of pandemic could visibilize the enormous inequalities of our cities. So the example of the case of Nairobi and what show Ruth could show us the importance of advance the scenarios that we don't have some sorry.
Can you hear us?
Oh.
I think that we cannot hear you. Perhaps you could try to reconnect your audio system. I think that your mic is not connected.
You can hear me? Sorry.
Hear you now, yes.
No distraction. So I think that a great point that show Ruth. It's about the centralization of the city, of the benefits, the principal benefits of the city that we that is the principal knowledge or example for us. The problem that we have in Chile that we could see with the pandemic is the great inequalities of the city, and the importance of planning to face this challenge. And the it's sorry, I'm not feeling well.
That's fine. If you want to take a break, that's fine. We can take it from there. Don't worry. Maybe we can go back to Lee Kuan Yew and Thomas with a couple of questions that are also very also been raised by the audience. First of all, I would like to ask Keen Wen Poon, what's out of the examples that you provided in your presentation regarding working with anxiety, designing for difficulty, and rebuilding work and workplaces, what lessons do you think that are crucial that you would like to share with the audience in Chile? What do you think would be the most important aspects to work on rebuilding the workplace and mainly this aspect of anxiety and designing for kindness? What can we learn from that?
So a couple of things that we've learned. One is, of course, that we need to take care of the mental health and not just the physical health of everybody, especially in the workplace. Just from simple examples of either people not having work, or in some cases, if there's work, there's a lot more work to do, especially if they're essential workers and there's a lot more stress. We do need to take care of the mental health of the workforce as well. And that is one of the developments that has come out of what it means to redesign the workforce and to redesign the office, the workplace. And of course, by default, extending the kindness to people by caring about how they're feeling mentally as well. Secondly, is a willingness to try new things. Many activities that we thought could not be done online are now done online using digital technologies. It may not be quite the same. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. But the willingness to try and experiment with new technologies. So for example, one of my collaborators teaches in the Polytechnic, and he found that it was not possible to have face-to-face classroom sessions, but the lecture was to 300 students. So what he did was he found inexpensive ways, in fact, free ways online to get the students to comment on each other's work during the lecture so that they end up getting more feedback than they would if they had a face-to-face lecture in a lecture hall with 200 people or 300 people. So the willingness to try, the willingness to experiment, and then to bring about new possibilities that we did not imagine before. And it shows that we're more versatile, more flexible, more adaptable. I think the last thing is to be willing to work with each other. I find myself working with new organizations, new unions, new industry associations. So one of the things that we did recently, which we were not paid for to do, but I told my research team that in a pandemic, in a crisis, those of us who can should help other people. We did a piece of work for free for industry association because they needed something urgently. And we decided that we'll do it. We'll drop everything else we had to do. We did it quickly in a week so that they will have something to work with to help all the members in the industry association. So a willingness to help each other, a willingness to try new things, and lastly is to take care of the mental health of the people around us. I think those are some of the key lessons that have been quite important in Singapore.
Thank you so much for the input, Ligun. You mentioned through your example about the professors teaching to large audiences the importance of redistributing the responsibility and actually empowering, in this case, students to take up new roles as well as active participants in the classroom, which I believe is a very central aspect also to the work that Tomás does in terms of open government. When we talk about accountability, transparency, trust, those are aspects that emerge when people are active participants. And I would like to go back to that question, Tomás, and ask you, what do you think? Are we ready as citizens to actually make the most of the technologies that are there available to really empower people to be active agents in the search for transparency, accountability, and the construction of trust?
Thank you for the question. It's an interesting question to me because I wonder if is it the right question, no? If are we ready? And it will depend. The answer to that question will depend from very subjective standpoints. But I would like to invite everybody to maybe change the question on how do we get ready? Because one of the challenges or traps that exist regarding citizen participation and this sharing of responsibility, as Professor Poon was mentioning in the example of the classroom, because there, as you just said, there is a parallel there. And I think that we get ready to hold a responsibility while we are exercising that responsibility. So we, in my opinion, we never get fully ready before that. And with that perspective, I think we need to design for learning. No, how do we learn as citizens to hold more responsibility, and how do authorities learn to better perform their roles as servants, no, as public servants. So that's one thing, because opening more spaces of participation, opening more spaces of interactive accountability is also a form of civic education, no, or civic learning, and that's part of the value. It's not only about the decision that's finally being made, but it's also about learning to live in a democracy by doing so. And the other thing I would like to comment from your question is that the emphasis on technologies. I agree with the idea that technologies present us with new possibilities, as well with new challenges. But opening our cities to the participation and the collective intelligence of the people is not only about technologies, but also about methodologies, processes, political commitment, many other things. So I think technologies are a boost to new forms of communication, coordination, decision making. But when we look at these processes of opening cities, we need to look beyond technologies. We need to look at the system, and technologies are one part in the design of a system. But we also need to care about the other aspects. So yeah, that would be my main ideas. No, wondering ourselves or focusing our attention on how do we get ready to use the possibilities we have and to take control of the challenges that we have as well. And I think that's extremely relevant because participatory planning is going to be key in this new stage of building strong cities for the 2030.
Thanks a lot, Thomas, for your input. So you place specific emphasis on designing for learning, and also the what's coming ahead in terms of the challenges presented by participatory planning, which in this case we're talking about how to collectively redesign public space functions in the city, and hopefully also that translate into the attributions that different authorities have over the physical space and the institutions. I would like to take that. I don't know if Ruth, you're back. If you can hear us. Okay, so no, not yet apparently. So I would like to take a question back also to King Wonpun. This is regarding the reactivation. So thinking about also a role of cities in a post-pandemic period. I mean, we don't really know if this is a post-pandemic period right now. At least here in Germany, we're in a second wave. What are the reactivation criteria for your city? So you mentioned particular examples, but what would you say are the most crucial, for instance, investments? Where do investments have to go in the next year or two, for example? Or what services will have to be redesigned so that we can actually fulfill this idea of more livable cities in a context of climate change in a post-pandemic world?
Thank you. So a few things. For reactivation of the city, we first look at the criteria in which we need to reopen our economy and the whole city. So for us, we have been very, very careful about reopening the city. We've had the same safe distancing measures in place since around July and August, which is that if you are in a public gathering, there must be no more than 5 people. If you're going to a outdoor eating place, no more than 5 people. And people are supposed to work at home by default instead of going to the office unless it's absolutely essential. We've had that for a few months, to the point where just last week, starting from last week, we had 0 community cases. Our only cases are from imported, which means we have people who are coming to Singapore to work or who are visiting or not, so rejoining their families in Singapore. And those are our imported cases. So hopefully once we get a continuous number of weeks without a community local case, we will be able to reopen the activity space in public spaces, public domains, offices, restaurants, to a lot more people. So that would be the first requirement. The second requirement is actually quite critical for Singapore. I gave you the statistic that showed that our number of tourist arrivals is just 2,000 compared to 1.5 million every month. That is very drastic and that is very severe. And we are now trying very hard to open up what we call air bubbles, travel bubbles between different countries and different cities. Our first air bubble is actually with Hong Kong. And from this weekend, we will be able to have 1 additional flight between Hong Kong and Singapore. Now, what does that mean for the redesign and infrastructure of the city then? First off is, of course, public health redesign for safe distancing must continue to be top priority for many of our infrastructure, whether these are schools, sports stadiums, offices. This has become number 1 priority for many people to think about. Secondly, we are going to think about what's going to happen to all the businesses that have been badly affected. Many of them have closed. They've left the city center. The question is, how do you rejuvenate? What do you need to do to rejuvenate the city center? Do we have more mixed use? Do we create new industries? Do we lower the rents? These are all questions that I think are extremely difficult to answer, but I think to answer them, we must. The third thing that we need to do is we need to think a little bit about what new industries there might be or what industries might look like. So for example, we are now used to working from home, or we will have to work from home a little bit more. Some businesses in Singapore have decided that they will make remote working a semi-permanent part of the way they handle the workforce. And it becomes a sort of blended remote working hybrid situation. And actually, if you think about it, the possibilities are quite limitless once you can do that, for creating space and time for people to manage their personal as well as their professional commitments. And that could be a really powerful possibility to think about in terms of how we measure what we mean by livability and the ability to balance the life between the personal and the professional. And I think the last thing that might be quite interesting for us to think about in terms of reactivating the city is actually to think about what is the relationship between the entire system of the city. That means now that we may not need to be more specialized for certain activities. What does that mean for transport? What does that mean for commute? What does that mean for housing? What does that mean for public spaces like parks? And I think if we can think about that in an interesting way, we might be able to rethink what the designs are. There are some studies that said that after the 1918 Spanish flu, the design of cities changed. So at the entire city level, may be an opportunity to rethink what infrastructure means, rethink what the city means, and rethink what it means to be sustainable and livable.
Thank you so much for your comments, Kinwon. So you're talking, you tap on many aspects, the new industries that will emerge, how new spaces will have to use, and how we think about this this vision about the future, which is in many contexts. I believe that those who work in the climate adaptation area have been puzzled with these questions for a while, and now on top of that, there is a new transversal challenge, which is a pandemic, and it's presenting several questions to how we actually rethink aspects of urban livability, urban adaptation to climate change, and these aspects become more pressing than ever now that we are at this junction, and that we really have to rethink about this future. And in this context, thinking about the future, I would like to go back to Tomás and ask you, Tomás, what do you think will be needed in the new city in a post-pandemic period? I'm talking about not necessarily about services or technologies, in terms of education, relationships, communications, data management. What do you think will be the most important areas that need to be redesigned in the context of Chile?
Because I don't know an answer to that question. I think that probably there will be more than one answer, because the reality of Chilean cities are very different. Different between the capital region and the rest of the country, different between income levels, different between the capacity that the municipality has to generate incomes. So I think that there will be different answers. Also, differences between cultures. In Chile, I think we are not aware enough of our internal cultural differences, which are very important. But I think it is very relevant, the fact that we are entering a constitutional process next year, because probably the role of cities and municipalities and the subnational level will be a very relevant part of the discussion. We've been for too many years in a framework that's too centralized, not only about decision making, but also about resources. And I think that it's very interesting that Chile is entering this for a new period of the country, while at the same time we are transitioning to what was previously called the post-COVID world. No? So we are entering this new scenario, and we will be deciding the new rules, and the role of cities will be very important. I think cities need more resources, not only economically, but also possibilities to adapt certain decisions to the local ecosystem, local culture, so on and so forth. And yep, I think that's one of the key questions for the process we are starting as a country, and we need a lot of ideas to address it in a proper manner.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We will have 5 to 6 minutes left. I would like to maybe pose a comment shared by a member of the audience, and he expresses the challenge of designing for kindness as a challenge that will, let me just correctly quote, designing a new society, if I can summarize it like that. So basically, it presents a new paradigm, which is transversal to all the doings in social and sociality. I would like to ask you, Liquan, if you can develop a bit more on this idea, because it seems that designing for kindness is not just a one goal that you're gonna tick on a box, right? It's just it's going to tell you that society became more kind than it used to be. This is a transversal paradigm. It is a great formula, as this colleague from Switzerland mentions. Would you like to elaborate a bit on that? On this?
Sure, certainly. So let me take an example that I think all of you will be familiar with. We've all had to wear masks in Singapore, and I'm sure in parts of Chile and many parts around the world. And if the mask is not well designed, it actually pushes back against your face, against your nose, and it's actually quite uncomfortable for breathing and for many other activities. I happen to have gone to school in the United States, and I actually met the person who first came up with the first idea for the N95 mask that looks a bit like a bubble. And the reason she designed it to look like a bubble was because she was in and out of hospitals a lot, thinking about and visiting relatives who were unwell. And she was very uncomfortable, made it difficult for both the patient, her family member, and herself to communicate. And she decided and came up with the idea that if you put it a bit like a bubble, you could actually be kinder to the relationship that you have between the patient as well as the caregiver. So at the product level, we can think about what is it that we value about our relationships, about our daily activities, and ask ourselves, is there a way for us to design the products and services we use to extend the kindness that we actually extend to each other personally into the products that we design, the services that we design. So that's at the very product level. At the other level, I think I mentioned briefly in the case of the return to the workforce that we need to care about the mental well-being of each other. And so it means reaching out every now and then and asking people how they are, a simple act, and maybe putting in place better policies in the workplace or in the community to make sure that somebody else is caring for each other. In work that we've done, in previous work that we've done, we talked a little bit about the future of healthcare, where we said that an organizing principle for the future of healthcare must be that we take better care of ourselves when we take better care of others. And we see this in the pandemic, where we take care of what happens to us when we are unwell, when we wear a mask, when we are careful about not spreading a flu to others. We're actually caring not only for ourselves, but also caring for others. And so it can be taken at the systems level, it can be taken at the product level, it can be taken in very simple actions that we do every day. We start with these. And as we become familiar with what it means, we can start to think about how we design organizations, how we design other policies, and maybe even design infrastructure to have the element of kindness in it.
Thank you so much, Kin Won. Very inspiring comments and perspectives. Certainly giving not a new role, but rather identifying how we can make the most of this endless resource that we have within all of us, kindness, and how to make it come out in practical manners so that we can support society is certainly one of the core challenges. And I'm really happy that you have raised this topic, because it certainly will be part of the agenda in many of the, and it is indeed part of the agenda in many of the contestation and processes that we see around the world in terms of how to be kind with the planet, how to be kind to others, how the economy can be kind to people as well. Kindness is certainly an element that is transversal to all the demands that we have in terms of our society and how we want our society to be like in the future. The many of the perspectives shown today, and I would like to just make a few comments just to wrap up the final part of this session. So we touched upon aspects of how to deal with anxiety about the future, designing for kindness, designing for difficulty, how to make people's lives better, rebuild the work and the workplace, understand how the new remote working life will have to be designed for the future, and also for the future of work and the way we work. We've discussed how these examples from the city of Singapore reflect in the case of Chile in a context of change and turbulence, where we try to reconstruct trust and ensure accountability and transparency, and we've positioned the role of technology and asked whether, as Thomas very timely corrected, this is not a question of whether we're ready to use it, but how we can be better prepared to use technology, and how we ensure that technology is there to serve people, not the other way around. We've also discussed aspects of the new industries and the new services that will have to be part of the new city paradigm in the future. And in connection to Ruth's presentation from Nairobi, Kenya, clearly the pandemic has presented new challenges to the traditional approaches to designing urban spaces. Particularly, she raised the aspects of concentration of services and the segregation of poor communities in cities, which is in Africa and Latin America a huge element of urban development in terms of the challenges that we face, and how collective decision making and participatory processes. She mentions a multi-agency approach, where this democratic participation in poor neighborhoods and waste management can be improved, hygiene can be improved, health, etc., can be improved as people participate in that aspect of development. And certainly, she poses the question of whether or not the traditional models for urban development and the traditional, the new conceptualizations we have about sustainable urban development are still or are really ready to fit the challenges of this pandemic. Those are open questions that I would like to highlight and just leave there for future sessions to discuss, and certainly present very interesting inputs to the future of urban development and cities in a post-pandemic time. I would like to thank all the presenters today: Kin Wanpun, Director of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities; Ruth Warguru, Director of the Planning and Urban Division of the City of Nairobi, Kenya; Tomas Gonzalez, Director of Fundación Tribu; and Claudia Garcia from the University of Concepcion in Brazil, Brazilian in Chile. And from my side, Cristóbal Robeco, International Director of ADAP Chile and Climate Service Center Germany here in Hamburg. I wish you all a nice rest of the day and enjoy the next sessions. Thank you very much.